Showtime.
It's the pre-party with J. Cal.
We are professional wrestling.
I'm building an alliance.
You are tuned into
the absolute top of the mountain, the ultimate professional wrestling.
Alliance-wrestling.com.
Welcome to the pre-party. Woo! Bells, whistles, yay! I'm your host, J. Cal, and this is a presentation of Alliance-wrestling.com, your number one source for news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance and the United Wrestling Network. Guys, What a week it's been. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're here every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, and this is a presentation, as I said, of alliance-wrestling.com. I hope you guys are checking out that website because we are updating it every single day, adding new content. Recently we talked about Scrap Iron, Adam Pearce, getting a shot at the Universal Champion, the big dog. He's getting a shot at Roman Reigns in that Universal Championship. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. We're also going to talk NWA. It's a throwback for my old school fans there. We're going to talk about the National Wrestling Alliance, and there's 2 championship bouts that are coming up this week. This week? Wow, is it already this week? Plus, we have a lot of other things to talk about too, with regards to the United Wrestling Network. The United Wrestling Network has added to its repertoire. The territory system lives, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to David Marquez. But with all that being said, guys, first and foremost, welcome. I see we've got Jimmy from the LB here on the chat. We've got Wrestling with MMA on the Twitch stream. And if there's anybody else here, say hi. We'll welcome you when you join the show. Again, my name is Jay Cal. You can follow me on all social medias at The Alliance Blog. That's Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, Tumblr, Instagram, Farmers Only. No, I'm just kidding about that. Wrestling with MMA just posted in the chat. Excited for Championship Wrestling from Memphis. And you should be excited. You should be very excited because first and foremost, when we talk about professional wrestling, there's always been this idea that the cream of the crop always rises to the top. Thank you, Macho Man Randy Savage, for that one. We know that the United Wrestling Network has, over the course of many years, efforted to create like a territory type system. We had initially, of course, Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. Over the years, there's been efforts to run promotions in Texas. There's been efforts to run promotions in Arizona, Las Vegas, and in partnerships with promotions like FSW in Las Vegas, NECW with Sheldon Goldberg out in Massachusetts. There had been connections with with Still Domain Wrestling, with Turn It Up Heat Wrestling or Turn Up the Heat Wrestling in Texas. And there's been a lot of Rockstar promotions. I know I'm forgetting a few. I should have written this down. But it never really landed. Oh, also Utah Championship Wrestling 0, the Colorado Wrestling promotion, which I believe is New Revolution Wrestling. There used to be the West Coast Pro Wrestling out in Washington. A lot of wrestling promotions were out there trying to work together, and all of it seemed to fail. There was no common ground. They never were able to lock in this territory idea until now. And it started a little bit differently, where the NWA had always focused on recognizing one singular World's Heavyweight Champion. The United Wrestling Network had always been focused on creating television in a market. Now, we know from the past year or so, there's been Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, of course. That's been the flagship of the United Wrestling Network. They've also added to that mix over the years Championship Wrestling from Arizona. And then, of course, recently they've been efforting to create something in Las Vegas, which originally was going to be titled Championship Wrestling from the Silver State. But now it might even be like a Future Stars of Wrestling, United Wrestling Network co-op. But then Memphis. Memphis was very specific to this whole thing, because what they did with Memphis is actually really revolutionary. They took their existing product, Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, but then they made it very market specific. So they added hosts who were in the local market, broadcasting out of the local studios, which was the CW30, and then they would tie in elements of what was going on in Memphis to the show. They would have scenes where Destin Starr would be at one of the Memphis basketball games, and they would kind of create this synergy, which was not only good for the market to feel like it was a native product, but it also did its job in creating interest in more live events. Being able to partner with local advertising didn't hurt as well either, because having local advertisers saying, hey, you know, oh gosh, where was I going? The shingle company, whose name I'm desperately trying to remember right now, is the title sponsor for the show. They're a local business in Memphis. And then, of course, all the other deals and agreements that the show has been able to come up with, local advertising, has helped fund the show. Pro Shingle, thank you, with Wrestling with MMA. Thank you for that, Pro Shingle. I should have known that. And so we know that this is that this was able to manifest based on having a live show. They've effort to do the same in San Francisco. They've effort to do the same thing in Houston and in Amarillo, Texas, but nothing has been quite as successful as the Memphis show. I actually talked to Dave Marquez, and he told me that the show has been very profitable over the last 2 years. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Excuse me, not 2 years, 1 year. They started in 2019. They're going on year number 2 right now. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. Of course, this was supposed to happen last year, pre-COVID. This was all supposed to take place April 25th. They had already had everything laid out. They were going to go to the the AutoZone ballpark, I guess, and they were supposed to do. Sorry, I'm just looking over my notes here. Excuse me for just a second while I look silly here. They were supposed to do this event last year, April 25th, and they had already had matches planned out. They had stuff booked, and it just didn't happen because, because of COVID. The show got straight out canceled. It was going to be at the birthday bash in the AutoZone Park, which is like, I guess, a minor league baseball park. They had sponsorship laid out. Wrestlers like Watts was supposed to be in attendance. And I assume that the roster will be very similar to what they used for the Drive-In Spooktacular. They did another show at Halloween called the Drive-In Spooktacular, where they did this wrestling event at a drive-in. Instead of charging general admission tickets, they charged people by the cars. And it allowed people to drive in, and that way they were able to keep social distance and obey all COVID-19 restrictions without putting anyone in danger. So that was really cool. But this will be not in a movie theater or drive-in. This will actually be in an arena at the top of the line event area, and they will limit the ticket sales. I would imagine that they're going to use a similar roster to the roster that was at the Spooktacular. So that, I mean, they're going to use, more than likely, they'll use Watts again from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, along with CC Chanel, Will All Day, and then local talents like Derek King, Alan Still, Humongous, who looks eerily similar to Lord Humongous, The Posse, and LA Hustlers. I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody like the United Wrestling Network television champion Levi Shapiro. And who knows? By the time this show kicks off on February the 14th, maybe they'll have decided to crown the United Wrestling Network World Champion at that event. That remains to be seen. We'll see what happens. It's all still up in the air. But yeah, it's very exciting. If you guys are a fan of the United Wrestling Network, Dave Marquez, Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, this is another outlet for you. If you go to the YouTube page now for Championship Wrestling, it's going to now be rebranded as Championship Wrestling from Memphis. But the Championship Wrestling page is the show that on YouTube featured just the Memphis version of the Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And you could see, like, they also added like interviews. They broke playlists down to matches, like specific matches with specific talents. Destin Starr does a podcast, a weekly podcast, and it's all up there. So it's very interactive. They do care about the fans. They've always tried to include the fans, and it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out. I'm excited for it because not only does it create more content for us to talk about and watch. I mean, believe it or not, I do enjoy watching wrestling. But what it also does is it gives a place for great talent to get exposed. Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, along with Primetime Live, has done a tremendous job of establishing that new generation of superstars. I mean, we've seen guys get picked up from AEW. We've seen guys get picked up to the WWE, NXT. Guys get signed to Ring of Honor. Guys get signed to Impact. And now we have another place to help discover new talent, to grow the brand. And of course, I'm assuming that those United titles will be defended. So we'll see like the Bodega, perhaps. And like I said, Levi Shapiro. And of course, whoever ends up becoming the United Wrestling Network World Champion between... oh my gosh. Between Mike Bennett and Chris Dickinson. Where's my brain today? Okay, so just looking down what some of you guys have been saying. I see a lot of you guys are talking. That's great. Willie Bowen is excited. I am too. We've got Terry McDermott in the house. Welcome, Terry. Welcome, Willie. Welcome, Dave Scooby. You guys are so great to be here every weekend and week out. I'm very excited about that. Terry McDermott says he's 4 hours from Memphis, so maybe he'll get to head to some of those shows. Hey, we always need some correspondence, Terry, so if you're out there, let us know. Maybe you could write the results, send those in. We could post them on the website. Jimmy says he used to watch Championship Wrestling from Hollywood before he ditched TV. If you check out that Championship Wrestling again, for the past year, they've aired those market-specific versions of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. If you need to get caught up, I mean, there's a whole year's worth of shows to watch. So if you're unfamiliar, Jimmy or anyone else in the chat, check that out. Just go to YouTube, type in Championship Wrestling, and you'll find it. So yeah, it's been a pretty interesting week, guys. How many of you were shocked? Right? How many of you were shocked on Friday night? I mean, I saw some of the tweets start coming in from the East Coast, so it wasn't super surprising to me. I'm not a normal WWE viewer. I don't check out SmackDown, Raw. I don't even really watch NXT. To be perfectly honest, it's not my cup of tea. And although I could see the merit in what that Vince McMahon land can do, I haven't really watched the WWE in some time. And that's saying something. I'm a stockholder in the WWE. So I don't really venture out of and watch that show on a regular basis. Now, I'm familiar with some of the things that they do because of social media. Again, they do a really good job of recapping the shows, not only on Twitter and Facebook, on Instagram, but if you follow them on social media, you kind of have an idea of what's going on. And with that being said, I know that a ton of people have been very excited about the churn of Roman Reigns and how heel Roman Reigns has been so dominant on that programming, and that he's the head of the table, and him and Jey Uso have been running roughshod all over the SmackDown roster. But to me, guys, the most interesting part is that the authority figure of the World Wrestling Entertainment is none other than Scrap Iron, Adam Pearce, the man to hold the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but 5 times. 5 times! Yeah, Scrap Iron Adam Pearce was the face of the National Wrestling Alliance for pretty much the last, from 2007 to 2012. Now, he didn't hold the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship from that entire time. In fact, he lost the belt 5 times to win it 5 times. But, well, I guess 4 times to win it 5 times, but you get the point. But while representing the National Wrestling Alliance, Scrap Iron Adam Pearce ventured across the globe. I'm not saying across the globe as a vapid comment. No, he literally wrestled all over the world, and I'm talking about wrestling in the United Kingdom for Hammerlock. That was an NWA affiliated promotion where he faced Zack Sabre Jr. I know a lot of you guys who are fans of New Japan Pro Wrestling know who Zack Sabre Jr. is. He also wrestled in Germany, of all places, of WXW. He wrestled Emil Stossel. I know he isn't as well known, but that night, Adam Pearce stood next to a lot of great talent. And I mean, it just wasn't Germany. It just wasn't the UK. He was a regular in Canada for CNWA. He wrestled regularly for the WFX Wrestling Group. Now they've since went out of business, but for a while there, they were using a lot of I don't want to say past their prime. That's not kind. They used a lot of talent formerly with the WWE, the guys like Billy Gunn or Charlie Haas or the Road Dogg, wrestlers like that, Bob Holly. And while those guys were competing there, they mixed that in with local talent from the Canadian market like Wavell Star and a few others. And of course, they were trying to bring in the celebrity that they could. And at one point, they even had Shane Douglas there. But Scrap Iron Adam Pearce was a regular part of that pay-per-view series, and he defended the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship there. He defended the title in Mexico, and not just for and against Blue Demon, but also for a short-lived Lucha Libre promotion that was connected to Southern California's XPW, which was XLUM, and I don't know what that stands for, but they were an independent wrestling promotion in Mexico. Adam Pearce would bring the 10 pounds of gold there, defend the title there. So what I'm trying to say is Adam Pearce, North America, Europe, also took the belt to Australia multiple times. Not just the 7 levels of hate that we're all familiar with, but literally defended that belt in Australia multiple times. In a time where the NWA was probably at its least relevant, Scrap Iron Adam Pearce forced you to believe that he was relevant. He forced you to believe that the NWA was relevant and carried the 10 pounds of gold with all the class and dignity of a world champion that a world champion should. And he defended the belt in Ring of Honor. He defended the belt in of course, Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. But again, it wasn't just one or two places. He was wrestling in NWA Anarchy. He wrestled for NWA Virginia. He would wrestle for NWA Southwest. And some of the names that he faced, Willie Bowen, no, he didn't wrestle in China. He never wrestled, never took the title to China. But as world champion, he defended that belt everywhere. And in some of the names he defended against, I mean, would go on to become future WWE stars. We talked about that on on an article we recently posted at alliance-wrestling.com. And I mean, we're talking about Shane Haste, who is now wrestling as Slapjack. He wrestled against Jackson Richter, who then was known as Phil Shatter, multiple times. Wrestled against Corey Graves, who back then was known as Sterling James Keenan. And of course, the very famous match where he wrestled against Daniel Bryan. Now, the history between this one is kind of interesting because at the time, Daniel Bryan was one of the standouts of that stable Nexus. It was the group from NXT that made to the main roster, and there were a bunch of what they considered to be rookies wrestling in the WWE, and they tried to take over. And on one such occasion, Daniel Bryan was a little bit more aggressive and maybe a little too violent, and he got fired because during the course of the attack that they were doing on Monday Night Raw, he choked out Justin Roberts with his own tie. Now, even when that happened, people just shook their head in disbelief, because why would they get fired for something that was kind of predetermined and scripted and everything else? But I guess it was because of what had happened with Chris Benoit a couple of years earlier, and the whole strangulation thing. It was just a black eye. And, it's not like Vince McMahon is ever going to sit on his own sword there, if you will. So they took that and fired him for it. We all knew he would be back in the WWE. It was no surprise at all that he was going to be back. But while he was off, he made the best use of his time. And that included putting over Scrap Iron Adam Pearce in that NWA Worlds Heavyweight Champion. Famously, before signing with the WWE, Daniel Bryan, also known as the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson, competed in the NWA at a very high level. In fact, when the NWA split from Impact Wrestling, it was Daniel Bryan who made it to the finals of that Reclaiming the Gold tournament. And it was supposed to be Daniel Bryan versus Brent Albright, who wrestled in the WWE as Gunner. Gunner. They were going to wrestle against each other in Bayman, Puerto Rico for the finals on I believe it was September 2nd, 2007. And that was supposed to be for the title. Unfortunately, the ambitious Daniel Bryan was injured in a match in Ring of Honor where Morishima landed on his face, broke his orbital bone, and prevented him from prevented him from competing in that match, essentially changing the entire plan that the NWA had set forth moving forward. And it wasn't long after that Daniel Bryan would end up signing with NXT, and so he never got to really have that match, that feud, that storyline with Adam Pearce, but they played it off later down the road. And when we talk about Adam Pearce and all the victories he held over 1,078 days, over 87 successful title defenses, we also have to acknowledge that he didn't just beat up-and-comers. I mean, he stepped toe-to-toe with Rhino and came out victorious. He beat Carlito, Caribbean Cool, down in Brownsville. I mean, Adam Pearce faced Charlie Haas, one of the world's greatest tag team wrestlers, and still managed to keep that belt. DCam is pointing out that Daniel Bryan did end up wrestling a week later, and he did, but it wasn't he wasn't long for the independent wrestling world, because shortly after that he did sign with NXT. And the funny thing about that time too, if you don't mind me just jumping ship here, was Bryan Danielson was a bit of a gold collector himself, a bit of a title collector himself. He would travel to Australia and win the World Series of Wrestling's Heavyweight Championship, while trying to win the Ring of Honor World Heavyweight Championship, and it almost felt like, had things gone Daniel Bryan's way, he might have been a triple crown when he won the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship. But of course, none of that came to fruition due to the injury, and again, they never really were sure how severe it was. He ended up in Puerto Rico as part of the special referee, and begrudgingly counted the 3-fall for Adam Pearce. But of course, that just never went the way it should have. So I see a lot of your comments here. Let's take a look. Let's see what you have to say. Jimmy says, Slapjack, that's a great name. Yeah, Shane Haste is a remarkable athlete. I've been a fan of Shane Haste for quite some time. He was one of the initial guys to come from Australia, Western Australia, Perth to be specific, Explosive Pro Wrestling in Perth, Australia. He was one of the guys that ventured out to Southern California and just so happened to get this title match at SoCal Pro. It was very odd for an Australian wrestler to challenge for the NWA World title, but of course things would change down in Adam Pearce's third reign as world champion, when he would start venturing out to Australia and defending the title against Australian greats like TNT or who else did he face? Hartley Jackson, I believe. I just don't have that all written down. And then, so Shane Haste has been an amazing wrestler. In fact, he came back later, would wrestle for Dave Marquez's Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. Him and Mikey Nichols were a formidable tag team known as TMDK, and they briefly had a shot with Impact Wrestling that didn't really go anywhere. But then that duo, Mikey Nichols, Shane Haste, went to Japan and became a central part of the tag team division of Pro Wrestling Noah. And they had matches where they would compete for the ground-honored Crown Tag Team titles, as well as wrestling in New Japan Pro Wrestling, before they both signed to NXT. And Mikey Nichols ended up opting out of his contract and went to go back to Australia, where he is currently the EPW Australian champion, and when not in COVID lockdown, is an active member of the New Japan Pro Wrestling roster. Shane Haste is still here in the United States, he was wrestling under the name of Shane Thorne in NXT, and of course, again, they're part of the Mighty or TM61, but now as part of the Retribution. And it's kind of funny that for all that time, he's still involved with the WWE. More of your comments. Willie Bowen says, I meant Rob Conway. Well, Conway never went to China either. Remember, the only NWA World Champion to go to China was our own Nick Aldis, the national treasure, if you will. He went to China to defend the 10 pounds of gold against Colt Boom Boom Cabana as part of the United Wrestling Network's Chinese special, and that whole thing was something else too. I mean, that was supposed to be what led to a creation of a Chinese produced wrestling show in cooperation. Why can't I speak today? In cooperation with the United Wrestling Network and David Marquez. Of course, that never came to fruition either, but it would have been cool if it did. And then Jimmy from LB brings up Sid snapping his ankle on the turnbuckle. That is a visual I would rather not see. Thank you very much. God, that was awful. More of your comments. Willie Bowen brings up Blue Demon Jr. Blue Demon Jr., a lot of people don't give that man enough credit. I understand that there might have been a language barrier, or there might have been some, I don't know, there might have been some sort of issue with booking a masked world champion, or maybe a Mexican-born world champion. But the rest of the NWA really didn't get on board with Blue Demon Jr. He did have a series of matches in of course, Dave Marquez's promotion, the NWA Pro. He also worked a lot with Pro Wrestling Revolution, which was an affiliate of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. But where he had a lot of success was actually wrestling in Mexico. But he did take the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship to the UK and Spain. I think he's the last NWA World Champion to defend in Spain. And then he also teamed with Ultimo Dragon, who was a former NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion when he held the J Crown, and they actually did a tag team match in Japan. And I bring it up not because he defended the world title there, but he wore the belt there, which I think is important because it showcases the title, and they put it on a huge stage, and they made it seem like a big deal. You know, when we talk about world champions who've been in Japan, we spent a lot of time talking about this last week, but you know, Blue Demon being there, representing the NWA, was a big deal for the audience to see the 10 pounds of gold, although it would have been preferred by the NWA fans to see that belt defended in Japan. Just being able to showcase that title is meaningful, because again, if people forget what the 10 pounds of gold is, if they forget about the NWA, then it ceases to exist, at least in that area. So when guys like Colt Boom Boom Cabana would show up and wrestle in pro wrestling Noah with the 10 pounds of gold around his waist, or in Blue Demon Jr.'s case, being in Japan wrestling an indie show with that belt on his waist, it still was very meaningful and had that impact that, hey, the world champion is here. The NWA World Champion is here. If you were like me and grew up thinking that Jim Crockett Promotions was the NWA, and if you grew up thinking that the NWA became WCW, then it must have blown your mind when, like me, when you saw Dan Severn at UFC 5 come out with the 10 pounds of gold. I mean, he's the first guy to ever hold both titles, like a mixed martial arts championship as well as a professional wrestling championship. And the fact that it was the 10 pounds of gold was all that much sweeter to me. And this all predates the Jarrett's involvement with the NWA, before there was an Impact Pro Wrestling, before there was total nonstop action. I mean, the NWA title had to continue to be to survive. And of course, I'm kind of rambling here, but that's what I would think of it. All right, so more of your comments. Willie Bowen said, yes, Adam Pearce also wrestled Brent Albright. Adam Pearce and Brent Albright had a series of matches, and they went back and forth, whether it be in Mexico, Ring of Honor, and Texas. I mean, those two battled for that title. I mean, there's video footage of Albright winning the title in Ring of Honor, and even Corey Silkin, who was the CEO of Ring of Honor at the time, said that was the best match they produced all year. Of course, during Ric Flair's Hall of Fame induction in the NWA, the two faced off again in a bull rope match that was very, very bloody. I don't think that match has ever been released online, but yeah, it was a pretty cool time. DKM's busting my chops. Okay, so the next thing I would like to show or talk about, of course, is tomorrow night on AEW, we get Serena Deeb, an NWA World Women's Champion, defending her title against Tay Conti. Now, what's very significant about this is there's just another title defense for Serena Deeb. I mean, we saw her win the title at Primetime Live, and I think that was a great deal. That was a big deal because it gave exposure to the title that really hasn't had a lot of exposure lately. We haven't seen a lot of NWA championships being defended in this last year. I mean, of course, there's COVID going around, but really the only place you saw the NWA titles defended were on Power or on Primetime Live. So it really was meaningful when Thunder Rosa appeared on AEW depended on did I say depended? Defended, excuse me, to see Thunder Rosa defend the title in AEW, and of course she defended it in Mission Pro, had a lot of success. It was shocking to say the least when Serena Deeb won that title, and but she's been carrying herself as a fighting champion. She's defending that belt quite frequently, and tomorrow night she defends her championship in the of course in AEW. It'll be interesting to see what happens next with that championship, because currently Serena Deeb is under contract with AEW. We don't know when the NWA will get back to producing Power, but I have the feeling, I have this sinking feeling that guys, it's January 12th. It's January 12th, and Serena Deeb, not that she's the authority for the National Wrestling Alliance, but she had mentioned that she believed that there were going to be TV tapings in January. Yet there has been no news. There's no news. And in fact, I'm getting sidetracked here, but the NWA, the NWA is quick to retweet stuff from AEW. Hell, they're even retweeting stuff about Adam Pearce. And now I'm getting sidetracked again, but let's get into that. The NWA, under Billy Corgan's leadership, has very rarely recognized Scrap Iron Adam Pearce, the 5-time NWA Worlds Heavyweight Champion. And whenever you hear somebody like Nick Aldis or Tim Storm cut a promo talking about the 10 pounds of gold, you'll quick to hear the names like Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Harley Race, Lou Thez, Terry Funk, Dory Funk Jr., Gerald Briscoe, Jack Briscoe. You hear these names quite frequently. And with good reason. These were the founding fathers of what we have today. But you never hear names like Dan Severn, or Blue Demon Jr., or Rob Conway, or Scrap Iron Adam Pearce. And I find it a little funny that now that the WWE has decided to do something with Adam Pearce in a physical altercation, they're going to put him in a match, if they actually put him in a match. If they put him in the match. The NWA has been quick to acknowledge this, and hey, he knows something about gold. He knows something about winning championships. They didn't mention him for about 2 years, and now all of a sudden they are. I feel that's very kind of, I want to say, insulting. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel it's very insulting, to be honest. I feel that Adam Pearce, who dedicated, like I said, 1,078 days to being the world's heavyweight champion, who did his job not only putting over the next champion, but putting over other talent. When he wasn't world champion, he lost to Phil Shatter. He did the job for the national champion. When he wasn't world champion, he wrestled in tag team matches. He wrestled on other cards, and he did take those losses from time to time. He helped build the NWA. You don't have an NWA today if it isn't for the guys like Rob Conway, Adam Pearce, or Dan the Beast Severn. And then there's a lot of points in between, and I don't mean to discredit anybody else. But I mean, you look at some of the names that are most important to the NWA, and yes, you needed Ric Flair to get here. Absolutely. You needed Harley Race to get here, but in the same vein, you needed Adam Pearce to get here. I don't know that if you had, say, Cahagas as World's Heavyweight Champion, that you get to this point. You don't get to Tim Storm unless you have Rob Conway losing to Jack Stane. Or actually, I messed that up, huh? Rob Conway loses to Kojima. Kojima loses to Conway. Conway loses to Tenzin. Tenzin loses to Jack Dane. Jack Dane loses to Tim Storm. Tim Storm loses to Nick Aldis. And the rest is history. So, I feel like it's a little bit insulting that the NWA only acknowledges Adam Pearce at a time where the WWE is hyping him up. That's not to say that Adam Pearce doesn't deserve it, but he deserved it all along, even prior to this. So, a little off focus there. Some of your comments, like Willie Bowen says that Serena Deeb should wrestle the winner of the United Wrestling Network Women's Championship. Yeah, and I mean, they need to crown the champion first, but yeah, you're right. Jimmy says, what about Shockwave? Is that over? NWA Shockwave was short-lived. It was 4 episodes, and it was basically just highlighting the NWA's booked matches of Primetime Live. Only the parts that were a part of the NWA. So like all those matches that you saw were actually booked by the NWA office through Billy Corgan and the such. Willie Bowen says, look how many Japanese wrestlers who held the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship belt. Well, we could do that right now, right? So the first NWA World Champion who was Japanese born was the Giant Baba, right? Baba held it by defeating, I think, Dory Funk and Harley Race. 2 different occasions. And then after Baba, there was a big break until we saw Tatsuji Fujinami, who beat Ric Flair. Now that initially that title match was it was contested, and eventually down the road the NWA office acknowledged it. But during that time period, they refused to acknowledge it. Where the Japanese acknowledged him as winning the world title. The world's heavyweight title, WCW said that the title was held up. It never really gave that honor to him. And then as things continued to progress, when Ric Flair left the NWA to join the WWF, there was a tournament in Japan where Masahiro Chono would win the World's Heavyweight Championship through the G1 tournament, and then later would lose that title to the great Muta, and Muta would end up losing that title, I believe, to, I want to say, Barry Windham? I'm not entirely sure. I don't have that written down. But eventually the title would end up back on Ric Flair, who would leave when WCW and the NWA would leave New Japan. Let me say that again. Gosh. When WCW and New Japan Pro Wrestling would leave the NWA, of course, things would start all over for the NWA. And eventually, Dan the Beast Severn would lose his title after 4 years to Noya Ogawa. And Ogawa would win that title in a UFO, that is the United Fighting Organization. In that ring, he would defend it in New Japan. He would defend it in the United States. And then eventually he would lose the title to Gary Steele before regaining it. And then he would be stripped of the title. Eventually, Steve Corino would lose the belt to Shinya Hashimoto. DKM just said, yeah, Muta, Wyndham, Flair. Okay, I was right. Good on me. And then Hashimoto would have that title until he would lose it to Dan the Beast Severn. And then, of course, that would kick off Impact. So Impact Wrestling would continue for 5 years under the agreement with the NWA, where it would control the NWA World Titles. It wouldn't be until 2013, after the 7 Levels of Hate, the NWA would crown a new champion in Kahagas, who is not Japanese born, so he does not get credit for this. He would lose the title to Rob Conway, who would take the belt to Japan, and in 2014 he would lose the title to Kojima. Again, like we said, Kojima would defeat Conway, but then again he would lose the belt back to Conway. Conway would win the title back and then go on to lose the belt to Tenzin, and of course Tenzin would lose to Jack Stane. And the interesting thing about that is a lot of people think that was one-sided, that the NWA talents only appeared in New Japan Pro Wrestling, but those Japanese talents actually came to the United States and would defend those belts locally in the local wrestling promotion. So like NWA saw Jeremiah Plunkett, of all guys, if you guys look him up, Jeremiah Plunkett would lose a challenge to Satoshi Kojima. And I know like these names might not mean a whole lot to you, but Plunkett has been an NWA guy for a very, very long time, but never had the standing to get a match like that. And for Kojima, who again, this is a guy who is a main event wrestler in New Japan Pro Wrestling, one of the top guys on the card, a former IWGP champion, to come to the United States, defend the NWA Worlds Championship, that was a big deal. That was a huge deal. And of course, Hiroshi Tenzin, he would come in and wrestle matches in NWA Houston, or maybe that was not Houston, but down in Brownsville. And eventually he lost the title at the Cauliflower Alley convention to Jack Stane in Las Vegas. So a lot of history there with Japanese champions. And of course, We talked about Tim Storm going to Japan. Of course, he retained the title. So I guess what I'm saying is, yes, there is that connection. We talked about that last week. And of course, if you guys subscribe to the podcast, the last JCal's view, we went into detail about titles that had been defended in Japan over the years. And I mean, it's really rich with history and tradition. I mean, we're talking about the tag titles, a tag title tournament featuring the likes of Terry Funk, Terry Gordy, and Cactus Jack at IWA Puerto Rico. We talked about the World Junior Heavyweight Championship in 1995 becoming a part of the J Crown, and that title being defended all over the world, even in WCW, part of Monday Nitro, Starrcade. So I mean, yeah, those titles certainly had weight, and they certainly meant something, and just like the NWA still means something. So moving right along, let's watch this for a second. Let's see, can I do this without messing this up? Let's see, how about now? No audio? Are you kidding me? Well, then I guess I didn't do more than the NWA did to promote that match. That was Jason Strife. You can find the video on Twitter. Man, that sucks. No audio. Sigh. Okay, well, anyways, this Saturday night, January the 16th, Nick Aldis defends the 10 pounds of gold for the first time in 2021, where he defends the World's Heavyweight Championship. Now, I hear you guys saying that the video was bad, but that's actually just the video. That was how it was designed. I didn't know that the audio wouldn't come through, so that was my fault. But the video is exactly how it was supposed to be. But yeah, Nick Aldis is scheduled to defend the 10 pounds of gold this Saturday night, Magnum Pro Wrestling in the metro area of Omaha, Nebraska. We're going to have Nick Aldis again, 5 defenses all of last year. He's already off to beating that record by having his first defense in January. We're off to a good start, and I can't wait to see what happens with this match. I believe that they're offering... Magnum Pro Wrestling is offering this as a pay-per-view. I'll do some more research on it, and we'll pull that up, and we'll put that information on the alliance-wrestling.com, which again is your number one source for news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance. But it's going to be a pretty big deal. Also scheduled to be at that show is Marty Bell, so I don't know if there's going to be any kind of NWA reunion there. But again, that's this Saturday at the Ramada Inn in Omaha, Nebraska. It doesn't get any bigger than that, baby. Omaha, Nebraska. And that's a 5 p.m. local time for the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Champion. Now, I in tongue-in-cheek, I genuinely mean this, that right now I just did more to advertise for that match than I've seen the NWA's social media do in the last month. I looked at Nick Aldis's Twitter page and didn't see almost any acknowledgement of this match happening in literally 4 days. So I don't know if this is a big deal to the NWA. Maybe it's just another payday for Nick Aldis. But Jason Strife is a hell of a competitor. I've seen him live multiple times, whether it be Pro Wrestling Mach 1 out here in Southern California. He's been on Championship Wrestling from Hollywood TV tapings. I've seen him wrestle in SoCal Pro Wrestling, and he is a very I don't want to. He's a competent athlete. He's a competent professional wrestler, and I don't think anyone should take him lightly. And it's been years since I've seen him, but he's been a pretty big deal in the past for the NWA. In the past, he has worked with the NWA, but he's a really phenomenal wrestler. I think this will be a good opportunity for people to see who he is and get some more eyeballs on him by way of wrestling against Nick Aldis. But it's funny because I see some of your guys' comments, and it's like you guys didn't even know this match was happening because the NWA hasn't publicized it. I mean, this match. Let's see. This match was. Can I find out when this was booked? Give me a second here, and I'll tell you if I can. I mean, we announced the card as soon as we saw it at alliance-wrestling.com. And it looks like, on December 22nd is when we initially published that this match was happening. And I know we weren't first in line to see that this show was happening, but how sad is it that, again, the National Wrestling Alliance hasn't publicized the match. Nick Aldis hasn't publicized the match. And I mean, this is where Scrap Iron Adam Pearce was such an amazing world champion. Because not only would he have been cutting promos on Jason Strife that would set this match up, but I mean, he would put it up on his YouTube channel and he'd make you aware of it. He'd make you know what was coming. And I just feel like, why can't the World's Heavyweight Champion do that today? Social media is easier now than it's ever been. Everybody can have a YouTube page. You don't have to be special to do this, and I just don't see it. So again, I'm a little miffed about why they didn't really push this and publicize it. But I think it's still going to be a great match. And again, when Aldis is there, he cuts a hell of a promo. He wrestles wonderfully in the ring. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see Jason Strife, who is a little bit more not charismatic, that's not the right word, a little bit more aerial in the ring, where he uses a lot of offense that requires some high impact. So it'll be interesting to see what's going on. More of your comments. Let's see. Lamb says he didn't even know the NWA Women's title will be defended today on AEW Dark. Is it being defended on Dark? I thought it was on Dynamite tomorrow. I guess I might be mistaken. Wrestling with MMA says, I don't care if it's just a payday for Aldis. If it's a championship match, he should be promoting the hell out of it. Absolutely. It's like you're saying to the audience that we don't care about people from Omaha, Nebraska. If he's taking the title to anywhere, he should be promoting that event. Like the whole thing about booking the World's Heavyweight Championship is you're trying to get a greater audience to the show. I mean, if I'm a wrestling promotion, if this is, JCal Pro Wrestling, and we're putting on an event, if I'm paying extra money to bring in your champion, your World's Heavyweight Champion, and you aren't publicizing it, then why the hell am I even bringing him in? I don't know. Craig S. says, it does irritate me, for a lack of a better word, that the NWA and even Nick Aldis himself are not advertising and publicizing some of these titles defenses. Yeah, I mean, look, the NWA did acknowledge a title match with Pearce and Flying Brian Jr. I mean, we talked about that on the show. Aldis, mentioned it too, but I just don't know why that it's not more publicized. Lamb says, well, they don't hype the Nick Aldis title defense, but tweeted a picture of Adam Pearce when he became the #1 contender to Roman Reigns. Exactly, and that's the other infuriating thing, because, again, I love Nick Aldis. I love Adam Pearce. I love Adam Pearce. I'm probably the biggest Adam Pearce fan you know. So I'm all about the NWA celebrating him. But why did it take so long? What was more pressing? I mean, you always hear Nick Aldis talk about some of the greats, some of his contemporaries, but he never brings up guys who just a few years ago were the world's champion. We don't hear about Adam Pearce, or they briefly mentioned Colt Cabana because he challenged for the world's title, but they never really mentioned Rob Conway. They mentioned Blue Demon Jr. at the 70th anniversary show. He was part of the spectacle, but again, we don't. They barely mentioned that Jack Stane was a former world champion. This to me is a glaring it's an oversight at the least. And I feel like, you know, a lot of fans today who are new to the NWA think that there's this disconnect that Ric Flair was a world champion and then nothing. And then all of a sudden, Nick Aldis is world champion, or Tim Storm was world champion. But the fact of the matter is, the only time the NWA world title went dormant was that year between the NWA and WCW splitting and them crowning Shane Douglas as world champion. Outside of that, every year there's been a world champion who's defended that title. And again, we've talked about it, but let's do it again. Dan Severn, you know, Noya Ogawa, Gary Steele, Mike Rapata, Sabu, Steve Corino, Hashimoto. You know, that's just in that wilderness era. But then you can keep going a step further and then talk about the Impact era, right? Ken Shamrock, Ron Killings, Jeff Jarrett, AJ Styles, Raven, Sting, Abyss. You know, they don't really acknowledge these champions. Christian Cage. They only acknowledge what I feel like is just a short amount of talent, and I feel like that's disappointing to say the least. More of your comments. Lamb says that the Women's Championship will be defended on Dark and Dynamite this week. So, I mean, that's great to see that the title is being defended. But again, it's I didn't even know it was going to be defended on Dark this week. Dave Scooby says, if it wasn't for some of the past champs, would Storm Aldis feud ever have happened? No. Like, let's be perfectly honest, okay? Let's go back in the Wayback Machine. When Bruce Tharpe owned the NWA, the only reason why the NWA even existed is because of the guys that came before Bruce Tharpe, and that was the Pro Wrestling Organization. That means guys like Dave Marquez and Jim Miller and Ken Taylor and Fred Rubenstein. And even though I don't like these guys like Rick O'Brien, David Arpin, I think that's his name, Ernie Todd, Dave Republic, I mean, Mike Porter, these guys are what kept the NWA afloat between 1999 when the WWE was done with the NWA invasion and into the Bruce Tharpe era. There was this time in history, like, they call it the Wilderness Era when they talk about when WCW left the NWA. And the Wilderness Era carried us to the invasion of WWE, Monday Night Wars. Jim Cornette brought in Dan Severn and Jeff Jarrett and Barry Windham and the Rock and Roll Express. And they had that faction in the WWE for a short amount of time before they ditched all of it. But then there was that time from the WWF invasion to the TNA era, and there was a lot of, I guess that's the Wilderness Era part 2, because a lot of that stuff isn't talked about. I am one of the guys that makes fun of Mike Rapata quite repeatedly, but if it wasn't for the likes of Mike Rapata, I mean, where would that NWA World title be? They needed somebody to carry it, and at that time when those promotions, even though they were small, and we used to, on the old NWA message board, we'd always say, well, why is so-and-so a part of the NWA? Why did they let this guy become an NWA member? But if it wasn't for those little members, like, these title matches don't necessarily happen. So it all happened for reasons. To get to Nick Aldis defending the World's Heavyweight Championship in China against Colt Boom Boom Cabana, or even more importantly, Nick Aldis versus Cody Rhodes at All In, I mean, it had to get there. It doesn't get there without the guys like Rob Conway, or it doesn't get there without guys like Adam Pearce or Colt Cabana. You notice how I didn't say the Sheik? Because these guys needed to be there to carry the vessel forward. If it wasn't for Mike Rapata, that belt never gets on Steve Corino. If the NWA died then, it never gets to Steve Corino. It never gets on Sabu. It never gets on Noya Ogawa. It never gets on Dan Severn. And it's just funny to think about how all this could have happened. So, more of your comments. Which NWA affiliated promotions during the Bruce Tharpe era were your favorites, if any? I liked NWA Smoky Mountain, now known as Innovative, and New South Championship Wrestling. Yeah, Craig, yes, Smoky Mountain, Tony Givens. Not only was Tony Givens always kind to this show, to this website, but yeah, I felt he did a good job of putting out a really good show. I mean, some of the production on his videos weren't great, but I mean, they had a lot of good talent. And again, you know, Jason Kincaid, Chase Owens, they had something special there in Smoky Mountain, also known as Innovative Pro Wrestling. And they even got Adam Pearce to come back, and Ricky Morton to come there, and Rob Conway, Jack Stane title match was there. So yeah, they did a lot of things right. I really did like what Smoky Mountain did. I also, for the sheer virtue of studio style wrestling, I really liked NWA Saw. I thought NWA Saw was fun. Some of the talent they used, like Josephus was there, or Jeremiah Plunkett, and again, they had some other names associated with that brand. They would bring in the tag team champions at the time, were like the Lords of Chaos, which was Damian Wayne and I can't remember his partner's name, but that guy was a joke too. But all in all, it was a fun time in that era. Even in the Bruce Tharpe era, I think there was a lot of cool stuff that was happening. You know, it's easy to look back in hindsight. There was a lot of things that were supposed to happen that just didn't. And at the time, because I had some close allegiances to the old guard, the old pro wrestling organization, it sucked when the International Wrestling Company took over. That's the Bruce Tharpe era. But I mean, NWA Houston had good shows. NWA Branded Outlaw had some good shows. There was a lot of good stuff that happened. I wish things would have been different. I wish they would have been able to work with the old ownership, and it was a lot of fun. More of your comments. And Craig corrected Jimmy. Yeah, Dr. Death was a product of good old JR from Oklahoma. I think that was the Oklahoma UWF connection. They really didn't do much with him either. That would have been fun. You know, I started thinking about a fun topic would be which wrestlers of the bygone era would have worked as world champion in those wilderness years, because we talked about I just kind of listed a bunch of guys who carried the 10 pounds of gold in between the WCW departure and Impact Pro Wrestling. But what about Dan Severn holding the 10 pounds of gold? I messed that up. Dan Severn did hold the 10 pounds of gold, but what if he wasn't available? What if they did put the belt on somebody like Dr. Death, Steve Williams? I mean, I heard this. I don't know how true it is, but during the world title tournament that crowned Shane Douglas as world champion, Jim Crockett Jr. wanted to put the belt on Greg the Hammer Valentine. Dennis Corluzzo wanted to put the belt on Chris Benoit. And of course, Todd Gordon wanted the belt on Shane Douglas. So there was like what would have happened if Chris Benoit would have been world champion? What would have been the butterfly effect for that? Jim the Anvil Neidhart challenged Dan Severn for the World Heavyweight Championship multiple times. Why didn't Antonio Inoki ever hold the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship? How come Baba got that reward? There's a lot of questions like that always enter into my head, but especially in that time, that wilderness era where there was a lot of opportunity. You could have done whatever you really wanted to because there wasn't a whole lot of people looking. Tony Norris, aka Ahmed Johnson, was one of the standouts of NWA Dallas. Justin Hawk Bradshaw, JBL, also another guy who was in that NWA Dallas. What if they ended up with the 10 pounds of gold? How would things have been different? We talked about Steve Corino and Sabu and Mike Rapata, but again, there were guys out there, Terry Taylor, Tully Blanchard. I mean, they were past their primes, sure, yes, but they weren't so far beyond that it would be unbelievable. I remember on an Impact Wrestling years later when Hulk Hogan started working with New Japan Pro Wrestling. And while he worked with New Japan Pro Wrestling, Jeff Jarrett came out and smashed him with a guitar, right? I'm sure many of you guys remember this. And he said he was bringing Impact to Hogan. But what if that match would have ever happened? The NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship between Jeff Jarrett and a Hulk Hogan who could still work. Sure, he was past his prime. But could you imagine the 10 pounds of gold around the waist of Hulk Hogan? That would have been so bizarre. And all this stuff could have happened. They could have put the belt on Dan the Beast Severn. They could have put the belt... I keep saying that. I meant Samoa Joe. What is wrong with me? I really like Dan Severn. I guess. But they could have put the belt on Samoa Joe. They had that opportunity to. They could have put the belt on Kurt Angle earlier had they chosen to. They just never did. You know, they put the belt on Sting. But, I mean, there was a time where, you know, AJ Styles and Jeff Jarrett seemed to be the only two that they really trusted to put the 10 pounds of gold on. But, you know, we could have had Monty Brown as an NWA World Champion. And then post all this, right? Forget Impact. You know, there was a point in time where Adam Pearce was supposed to be in the setup with matches with Booker T. 5-time versus 5-time, right? They could have set that match up, and who would have been upset to see Booker T as NWA Worlds Heavyweight Champion? Who would have been upset if Dustin Rhodes beat Adam Pearce for the 10 pounds of gold? So yeah, I'm going on tangents here, and I'm sorry if it's you know, we are going a little bit later, so I apologize for that. But I've always had these ideas like, what if, you know, instead of Chris Candido losing to Dan Severn, what if they kept the belt on Candido for a little bit? He was a hell of a talent and never really got his chance to shine. Willie Bowen says, Dr. Death, Ted DiBiase, Terry Gordy, Rocky Johnson would have been great NWA World Heavyweight Champions. Also Magnum TA. You know, I think the long-term booking in Crockett was to put the belt on Magnum TA, except for, you know, the whole accident that pretty much ended his career. Willie Bowen says, Goldberg. Why not? I mean, there was a point in time, you got to remember, in that Wilderness era, you know, pre-TNA, where a lot of these guys were no longer under contract. If some of them would have decided to opt out of their, you know, deals with Time Warner, they could have been free to wrestle anywhere. We know Goldberg went to Japan and wrestled in Hustle. That was a sports entertainment offshoot of 01. It was sponsored by the parent company of Pride Fighting Athlete, and they would use a lot of the WWE cast-offs like Goldberg or the Dudley Boys, and you know, they totally could have used Goldberg to win that title if they wanted to. And then more of the comments. Lamb says, to be fair, Samoa Joe should have won the title from Jarrett back in 2006. Absolutely. Lamb, I swear to God, I think you and I share the same brain, because Samoa Joe was the most over wrestler in Impact in 2006. No doubt about it. And I've mentioned this from time to time, and I'll say it again. One of the moments that will live in my head forever was watching Impact Wrestling on Fox Sports and watching Samoa Joe as the X Division champion interrupt Jeff Jarrett's promo and walk down to the ring, and Jarrett's exiting the ring, right? And Samoa Joe's exiting the ring, and Samoa Joe just gives him one of these shoulder hits, right? And Jarrett is stunned. Jarrett is blown away like, oh crap, I can't piss this guy off. That'll be trouble for certain. And so that's always been one of my favorite moments in all of Impact Wrestling. So seeing him win the world's title in 2006, absolutely, it should have happened. And it's almost disgraceful that it didn't happen, to be honest. A Polynesian world champion, a Samoan world champion. We could have had a lot of great stuff back in the NWA days. Let's see. Jimmy says he's a big Samoa Joe fan. Chris knew who had every single Goldberg match. No, Jimmy, I don't remember that. Terry McDermott says Mike Rotundo and Greg Gagne. Mike Rotundo is a very interesting choice. I really liked Mike Rotundo in his time in the NWA when he was the TV champion, and then the Varsity Squad. That was a lot of good stuff too. Ron says Samoa Joe is flat out one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Absolutely, Ron. I agree. Joe is. I hate the fact that Joe has been regulated to announcing. I think he's horribly underused in the WWE, and maybe it's an age thing. Maybe he's just getting a little old in the tooth. But he's the guy that should have beat Goldberg for the title. He's the guy that should have beat Hashimoto for the title. He's the guy that should have beat Jarrett for the title. I mean, I've got lists of things that Samoa Joe should have done that they never gave him an opportunity to do. Brian Adams or Brian Clark from Chronic could have been NWA World Tag Champions. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't long after WCW closed shop, that other wrestling promotion, World Wrestling All-Stars, that was based in Australia, started promoting events, and they used Chronic. I mean, I saw them wrestle against Native Blood, which was I'm forgetting names now. The Navajo Warrior and I can't remember his tag team partner's name, but they wrestled at World Wrestling All-Stars, and that event took place in Las Vegas, Nevada. I mean, they used guys like Eddie Guerrero, they used Chris Sabin, they used Frankie Kazarian, Christopher Daniels, and would later kind of be like a sister promotion to Impact Wrestling. And they, while Impact had the NWA World Championship, World Wrestling All-Stars had Sting with the WWA title. They featured Lex Luger, Scott Steiner. I mean, it was basically WCW Light, WCW 2.0, if you will. And eventually those that feud accumulated with Jeff Jarrett beating Sting for the WWA title and unifying in that championship with the 10 pounds of gold. Craig says some of the World Wrestling All-Star shows are on the High Spots Wrestling Network. Yeah. And then I see Terry McDermott says Samoa Joe is 41, so he may want to slow down. Yeah, I mean, Samoa Joe and I are about the same age. I know that. Him and Adam Pearce, too. I mean, look, Pearce is wrestling for the World's Heavyweight, or the Universal Championship this Royal Rumble. And again, like I said, I'm not a big WWE fan, but I'm thinking about subscribing to the network just to see it. And can we talk about that for a minute? As much as I disparage the NWA about waiting till now to acknowledge Adam Pearce, how awesome would it be if there was some sort of NWA involvement in this match? Right? Now let me zoom into the camera a little bit. Let me talk closer to you guys, because I really want you to hear what I'm saying here. I just heard an interview with I'm stuttering all over myself today. I just heard an interview with the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Champion, Nick Aldis. And in that interview, Nick Aldis said that his dream opponent would be Triple H. And he said that, growing up, his favorite was Bret the Hitman Hart, but it wasn't until he decided he wanted to be a wrestler that he started to really look at what Triple H was doing and kind of idolize how he was working. So what if Nick Aldis showed up at the Royal Rumble and helped Adam Pearce win the Universal Championship? I know it's crazy, guys. I know it's crazy. I know it doesn't make any sense. Why? Why would he help him? Because it's the damn bloodline of the NWA World Champions to be in cahoots with each other. What if that set up an entire invasion? What if we did the WWF invasion of, or the NWA invasion of the WWE in 2021? Hey, it might not have worked in 1998, but I think we're ready for it now. What if we had, right, Vladimir, Aldis, Trevor Murdoch, right? What if we had these three guys along with, the Pope, Elijah Burke? I mean, you're just not gonna get the women's champion, Serena Deeb. But what if you get, J.R. Kratos and Aaron Stevens? And what if these guys just roll up and beat the hell out of Roman Reigns and Adam Pearce walks out as world champion? I mean, it would certainly, look, it would be crazy. I know it's crazy. Guys, I know it's crazy. But would you not mark the F out? And I know I try not to cuss on this podcast, but I'd lose my freaking mind if they did that. I'd lose my mind. I think it would be great. Look, the NWA, as of right now, the NWA is a brand without a home, right? There's a TV champion that hasn't defended since he won the belt. There's a national champion who hasn't defended since he won the belt. Tag champions that haven't defended since they won the belts. The whole the NWA roster has just been on hiatus until Power returns. But how insane would that be? I mean, seriously, somebody get Billy Corgan on the line. Paul Heyman would eat this up. You know that they could do it the right way. There's the right people in charge. You don't make it hokey. You don't make it silly like they did in 1998. You make it very serious. You make it very serious. Anyways, it's 12 past the hour, and that's usually a lot longer than we go here on the pre-party. but I just felt like I had to go off on my tangents here. I'm going to read a few more of your comments before we go. Terry said he thought about subscribing too. Yeah, I mean, look, it's $9.99. I would gladly pay that to see Adam Pearce wrestle again. Like when they announced it, when they were talking about it, like Dave Marquez kind of dropped a hint about it on Facebook. Mike Johnson from PW Insider dropped a hint about it on Facebook. I didn't tune in, but I was sitting there watching everything I could on social media, see what happened. I watched the breakdown on YouTube. I watched it multiple times, actually. And Adam Pearce, hate to break it to you guys, but he's in better shape today than he was when he wrestled. And that's from his mouth, not mine. So seeing that would be pretty awesome. And I mean, look, you could, if there was a way to somehow make this work, right? You could put the NWA on the WWE Network. They already own all the history of the Jim Crockett promotions and all that fun stuff. But I just think it would be pretty awesome. And then, of course, with Triple H being such a fan of the NWA and the history and that 10 pounds of gold, I mean, of course, the comeuppance is Adam Pearce would eventually lose that title and get his ass kicked. But then you could set up Triple H versus Nick Aldis at WrestleMania, right? Right? I mean, tell me that's a bad idea. Triple H is old. Triple H is past his prime, but Triple H could still get a good match with Nick Aldis. Nick Aldis could have a great match with Triple H. You're killing multiple birds with one stone here, and I'm telling you, it makes too much sense. Ron Gibson says, before I found out that he was like behind the scenes, I wouldn't have minded Gentleman Chris Adams carrying the 10 pounds of gold. I mean, it certainly would have fit in with the times. The thing about when Ric Flair was world champion is they weren't afraid to moving the belt around as long as it went back to Flair. And Chris Adams would have been an obvious choice. Before his passing, Gino Hernandez might have been a good choice as well. Craig S. says the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship showcased on WWE programming and the NWA Worlds Women's Championship showcased on AEW programming. Right? I mean, if you're Billy Corgan, that means you've arrived. Right? I mean, and then you could send the junior heavyweight title back to Japan, right? Send Barrett Brown. Put the belt back on him. Send him to New Japan. Dave Scooby says Kevin Owens and Pearce have history from Ring of Honor. Will KO try and help Pearce against Roman? I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. I consider Adam Pearce a close personal friend. He's not going to divulge anything to me, but I do believe that match isn't going to happen. In my heart, I would love for it to happen, but in my head, something's going to happen maybe Friday night or maybe even before the pay-per-view, and Pearce won't be in the actual match. But God dang, that would be fun. It'd be fun. Could you imagine if Pearce won it, leading to Triple H finally getting his wish to... Yeah, exactly. Okay, so, Ron, either you wrote that as I was talking or you just read my mind. Kevin Von Erich or Bruiser Brody would have been great NWA World Heavyweight Champions. Well, Kevin should have had it. See, and again, going back to 1995 with NWA Dallas, Kevin Von Erich was competing for the NWA North American Championship. He was feuding with Greg the Hammer Valentine over that belt. And it was like they were trying to pull the ties of the Valentines versus the Von Erich family from a generation before. But yeah, Von Erich could have been in that tournament. Should have been in that tournament. He was mostly retired by 1995, but I still think that would have been an interesting choice too instead of Shane Douglas. And then Bruiser Brody. My problem with Bruiser Brody is I don't think over-the-top gimmicks need a world title. Bruiser Brody's a draw. He's also a brawl, but he's a draw without the title. Bruiser Brody could go anywhere in the world and be a draw. He didn't need a belt to make him relevant. And I don't mean as all champions need a belt to be relevant, but it doesn't fit the style. He was there to hurt people, not necessarily to win championships. Same thing with Abdullah the Butcher. The same thing with Cactus Jack. The same thing with Kevin Sullivan. I mean, the guys who have this gimmick, this eccentric gimmick that like fighting and blood brawls and all that, you don't need to put a belt on them. The draw is them themselves, the character. Just like I would never have put the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship on Andre the Giant. He was a spectacle in him of itself. He didn't need it. He doesn't need that kind of a rub. Terry says he can't see Billy and Vince working together, but I'm telling you, I had firsthand knowledge that Billy Corgan has been to the WWE Tower. You know, he's not, I don't know if it's Titan Tower or if he was in Florida, but I mean, he's met with the WWE. I mean, they called him, I think they called him the Widowmaker or something like that, because he was able to take out both Bruce Tharpe and Dixie Carter. And there was a lot of respect for the NWA when Billy Corgan first purchased it. I don't know if that still remains, but yeah. Craig S. says Triple H versus Nick Aldis. In the build-up to the match, Triple H could come out with the original 10 pounds of gold, the belt that Ric Flair retained possession of when the big gold belt was made. Yeah, or just imagine this, right? Imagine Ric Flair leading Triple H to the ring against Nick Aldis. You know, it's like, hey, that's our history. That's our tradition. Aldis, you give that back. And Aldis could be like, no. Aldis could actually be the babyface or heel in this. It would be great either way. Ron says Billy admires Vince. It is Vince that Billy aspires to be. I mean, I don't really know. I'll be honest with you. I can't wrap my head around the way a rock star thinks, right? I can't wrap my head around anything Billy Corgan does, because he lives in a different world than you and I. We're average Joes. We go to work Monday through Friday. We put in our hours. We take a weekend off. You know, we drink a beer. We eat dinner. I mean, that's our lives, right? Billy Corgan's a rock god. I mean, he gets on stage and millions of people sing his songs and tell him how wonderful he is, and when he has critics, he just ignores them. You know, that guy is in a different state and plane than you and I don't think any of us could really quite understand what goes on in his head. But wow, you guys got me talking for an extra 20 minutes. Well, that's gonna wrap it up, guys. Of course, this has been very, very fun. I always enjoy our chat, and of course today has been today's been a little bit longer than that. See, you guys are still going, so now I'll have to read some more. Jimmy says he's still shocked that Corgan stepped into wrestling. First of all, Billy Corgan, this is Billy Corgan's third attempt at wrestling. His first was pro wrestling, what was it called? Oh crap, I'm forgetting the name, but he had a wrestling promotion in Chicago, Illinois, where he actually was one of the main events that he booked was Rhino versus Davey Boy Smith Jr. It got a lot of buzz, but it just kind of fizzled out. And then, of course, he was part of management for a while for Impact Wrestling. That's where he met David Lagana, and that's where they formed that relationship that allowed them to go out and purchase the NWA when the time was right. And then Lamb says the last time the NWA Worlds title was on WWE TV physically was in the HBK versus Flair feud, if he remembers correctly. Yeah, I think so, man. I think that's what it was too. I mean, I know the last time the champion was on TV was Dan Severn, and although he never had a world title match, Ron says Resistant Pro. Yeah, exactly. That Resistant Pro was the wrestling promotion that Billy Corgan first started, based in Chicago, Illinois. But getting back to the last time the NWA had a world champion on WWE programming, I mean, Dan Severn never defended the title while he was world champion, but he certainly showcased it. And I mean, I remember watching Saturday Night Shotgun, and he took on a young man by the name of Shooter Tony Jones, who was a Southern California wrestler out of APW and wrestled in matches in UPW. And they kept talking about a title match, but it never happened. It never materialized. But that would have been cool too, even back in 1998, if Severn actually had an opportunity to defend that title. But, you know, they mostly treated it as like a trophy that he carried to the ring. They never really treated it as a title that could be won or lost. More of your comments. Jimmy wants me to keep going. Jimmy, you're just lonely, man. Jimmy's actually a personal friend of mine, so if you hear me be mean to him, it's just that's our sense of humor. So don't mind us. But that's gonna do it, guys. It's 24 minutes past the hour, and it's been a lot of fun. I was worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about today, but you guys always bring out the best in me, and I hopefully bring some entertainment and value to you. Of course, this was and still is a presentation of Alliance-Wrestling.com, your number one source for news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance, the United Wrestling Network, and I guess apparently the WWE, right? If you like this podcast, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with your friends. Leave comments because that really helps us. When you go into the, not in the chat window, but go into the comments section and leave a comment, because that really helps the algorithm with YouTube and everything else get us more views and all that good stuff. I mean, 11 of you have been hanging out with us for the last hour and a half, and that's pretty awesome, so I do appreciate it. If you would like to support the show, you can get a hat similar to this one, or you can get a t-shirt with this logo on it by visiting alliance-wrestling.com and go to the merch section. Again, give us a thumbs up if you like it. You can follow us on all social media. If you want to hear the audio version of these podcasts, make sure you check out we're on Amazon Podcasts, we're on Spotify, and we're also on Apple. So you could ask Siri, you could ask Alexa, and you can even say, "Hey Google, play the Alliance Blog podcast."
I looked for the Alliance Blog podcast on Spotify, but it either isn't available or can't be played right now. Okay,
well, I guess it's not available right now, but normally it is, so you can check that out. So until next time, guys, please enjoy wrestling. That's what we're here for. That's what we do. You can follow us on all the social medias. And to quote the infamous words of an ancient Chinese philosopher, please absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, in the mighty words of Bruce Lee. Thank you. Good night. And we'll see you next time here on the PreParty.